Hey gamers, Maniac here with GameAccess.net doing another site podcast. And this time we're not going to be talking about a blast from the past, although it might be a blast from the recent past. I don't know what compelled me to cover this subject, but I was compelled to talk about it. I feel like with two games, a lot of impact on a very popular brand, it deserves to be talked about, and it should be talked about. We're going to be talking about The Force Unleashed. Force Unleashed are two games. They were both developed and published by LucasArts, except for the ports. I think the ports were developed outside the development studio. They've been released on multiple platforms, including the PC, Xbox 360, Wii. I think there was even a DS version. It is a canonical bridging of the story between Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, and Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. And it details what Darth Vader and the Emperor were doing during that time, and culminates with the formation of the Rebel Alliance, which is, I think, a story that everybody wanted to see. I think that was the story that people were kind of hoping that was going to be told in Episode 3 and wasn't. Episode 3 kind of devoted specifically to the rise of the Empire and ended when the Empire rose. It didn't really talk that much about the formation of the Rebel Alliance, and the couple of seeds that Lucas had written and shot to sprinkled in were cut for time because it was too long. The sequences that would have added too much time. It would have been nice to see them, but I understand why those scenes were cut. So this game picks up on that. Darth Vader finds a young boy, the son of a Jedi, that he is sent to kill on the Wookiee homeworld, that is so powerful he's able to pull a lightsaber from his hand. Now, for those of you who don't know too much about Jedi or how the Force works, a Jedi can't really pull a lightsaber from another Jedi's hand traditionally. They can pull a different type of weapon, but either it's somehow impossible through the Force, or it's just not something that a Jedi does. It is usually impossible for a Jedi to do that. You couldn't do it in Jedi Knight, even though you could do it with other weapons. You could pull weapons out of the hands of enemies, but you could never pull a lightsaber out of another Jedi's hand. You just couldn't do it in Jedi Knight, and I always just thought it was impossible. I think a lot of people thought it was impossible. But sure enough, this boy did it, and he did it to Darth Vader. Thus began the saga of The Force Unleashed. Now, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but I think it was important for people who don't know and are familiar with the Star Wars universe to get some information on how this story fits in before I start really talking about its development. The Force Unleashed was developed by LucasArts. LucasArts was the primary game development arm of Lucasfilm Limited. It was owned by George Lucas before George Lucas sold the Star Wars license to Disney and most of his empire with it. It has developed up to that point some of the most... It was, at its height, probably one of the biggest publishers in the world for video games. And a lot of the games, not just the Star Wars games, are still remembered fondly today as some of the best games ever made. So it had quite a pedigree to it. A lot of cult classics, a lot of bestsellers, a lot of good Star Wars games, some bad Star Wars games. But for the most part, it is fondly, or at least I fondly remember the company. So it got to a point where around the time that the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3 were ramping up development, where LucasArts wanted to make a story that was going to be like the next big Star Wars story. And if you've read the book, The Making of The Force Unleashed, they had a bunch of different ideas. One idea was they wanted to do a Darth Maul game. That would have been nice. One idea was they wanted to do a story where you played a Wookiee and fought for the Rebel Alliance. It didn't go too far because I think even George Lucas said, I'm telling you all about story and plot and everything else, and you're going to have a protagonist that can't even talk? So, probably not a very good idea. Another idea was doing like a far, far in the future story where you had, just one Jedi council. The Jedi and the Sith councils were the same council. There was just one single council. And there was a murder, and it was like a murder mystery or something like that. And the possibility existed that a descendant of Luke Skywalker could have murdered someone or was framed to kill someone by the descendant of Han Solo or something like that. Kind of interesting idea. There was the exact opposite story of that they were working on, where they would have gone to a story, I think it was called Jedi Prime, to tell the story of the very first Jedi, even further back than Knights of the Old Republic would have been, where it told the story of the very first Jedi and how he encountered the very first Sith. When the connection to the Force was finally established in the Star Wars universe. Don't know really where they would have gone with that, though. I really don't know. But then they thought, well, they kind of wanted to focus on the idea of doing a game where you played as a superhero. Like somebody's super powered in the Star Wars universe. They thought that was kind of interesting from a gameplay perspective. And they thought, well, this is Star Wars. We already have superheroes. They're called the Jedi. We can just have this guy not only as a Jedi, but as a really, really, really powerful Jedi that can not only Force choke, but can take a guy with the Force and throw him across the room or something like that. A really, really powerful Jedi. That'd be something interesting to do. And to play around in like the concepts between Episode 3 and Episode 4 was very appealing. You had a lot that you could tell there. A lot that had to be approved by George Lucas, but for the most part, he did approve most of their ideas. And I'll talk about that later when we start talking about the game. The early buzz on this game was phenomenal. Not just because it had been a long time since we had played a Jedi Knight in a Star Wars game, and a Star Wars action game. We had done it in Knights of the Old Republic and stuff like that. But it had been a while since we had done it in an action game. The last Jedi Knight game was Jedi Academy, and that was out in 2003 for the PC. Nobody had really, they really, as far as I remember, they really didn't do anything like that afterwards, and they didn't do anything like that since. So just based upon my pedigree with the Jedi Knight series, I was really interested in it. And they released some technical videos, which were just simple CGI rendered demos, where you could see a really, really powerful Jedi just kind of messing around with a lightsaber and being able to throw people across the room and stuff like that. But I think what really got people really interested was when they showed either, I can't remember if it was an image or if it was a trailer or both, because I know that the image exists. I think it might have been probably one of the early concept art for the game. And for those of you guys who watched The Big Bang Theory, that show, there's actually that image in a poster or a lithograph or something like that is actually in the comic book shop. If you look really closely, I think it's behind the register in the comic book shop. There's an image of what looks to be a Jedi pulling a Star Destroyer towards the planet to make it crash. That was from The Force Unleashed. That, I think, was what made people really interested. Oh, by the way, through the Force, anything is possible. And yes, you'll be able to pull size matters not. You'll be able to pull a freaking Star Destroyer to crash it onto a planet. That was awesome. Everybody was going gaga for it. The buzz for this game could not have been higher, especially when they really started to ramp up the advertising for the game. They started doing the documentaries where they say, oh, you'll be able to do anything. You're going to be really powerful. You're going to be Vader, and you're going to be trained by Darth Vader. Basically the whole story was going to be and they think they kind of established this. You're going to play as Darth Vader's secret apprentice, who was trained by Vader since he was a small boy. He is basically the antithesis of Luke Skywalker. He is what would have happened to Luke Skywalker if Luke Skywalker hadn't been taken from Vader and Vader didn't know about him or something like that. All those plans that Vader had to overthrow the Emperor with Skywalker, perhaps he tried to do that sooner with someone else. And it was canonical, at least from that possibility, to Empire. There's a few snippets towards the end of Empire when Vader is almost pleading with Luke before Luke, tries to kill himself by jumping into the reactor, where Vader says, "You can destroy the Emperor. He's foreseen this. Join me. We can rule the galaxy together as father and son." Later on, Vader changes his mind because by that point the Emperor already knew, and the Emperor's like, "No, you bring him to me. We're gonna turn him, and we'll make him an ally for us, and we'll work together, and we'll." And then the Emperor had his own plans where he would use Skywalker to replace Vader. So basically the Sith all had their own plans, basically. Vader wanted to overthrow the Emperor wanted a new apprentice other than Vader, because Vader was still more machine than man, that kind of thing. He thought that Skywalker might have the possibility of defeating Vader, and even if Vader survived, well, it would have been fine. So the early, this was supposed to be like the sprinklings of the first ideas. And on top of that, it would have culminated with the formation of the Rebel Alliance, which is a story that Lucas tried to tell in Episode 3, but couldn't get into Episode 3. So, more power to him for finally being able to tell that story. I was interested in it. Jimmy Smits reprised his role as Bail Organa, Leia's adopted father. It was kind of unfortunate because I really thought that I take it back. It wasn't unfortunate that they got him to be in the game. I was happy they were able to get him to be in the game. It was unfortunate that they got him to be in Episode 2 and Episode 3. And I think Jimmy Smits is a great actor. I really liked him. He did this movie where he played a bad guy in a buddy cop movie or something like that I really liked. He played a really, really good bad guy. I liked him as the bad guy. I liked him in the Star Wars movies, but I thought they really underused him. In fact, even Mr. Plinkett said they could have just cast Paul Blart Mall Cop to do Jimmy Smits' role. What would have been interesting is if Jimmy Smits would be a guy who would try to do something towards the end to try to stop the Empire or something like that. But I don't think it would have worked too well canonically. It would have been like, Smits could have pulled out put a vote of no confidence in the Emperor before he becomes the Emperor or something like that. Maybe it would not have worked, but that would have been interesting. That's why you would have casted him for that sort of role, as if he's gonna be the person to tangle with Palpatine when Palpatine starts going a bit mad with power. Well, not really starts going a bit mad with power, but when it becomes clear that Palpatine had gone mad with power, it would have been nice if Smits had stepped in. In the end, all he does is sit and watch with Padme, while, as Padme says, liberty dies, with thunderous applause. Really sad scene emotionally, of course, but that was what they were going for. But, I mean, Smits, you did a great job, but really, I don't know. I was kind of hoping they would do more with him. And they finally got the chance to do that in The Force Unleashed. And I'm glad. I'm glad that they got Smits back. I really like him. So, the buzz for this game, like I said, could not have been any higher. It was really exciting in the days leading up to the game's release. And by that point, they announced it was going to be out for the Xbox 360, the PS3, there was a PS2 version. There was a Wii version, but it was a simpler version. There were other. It was a different version of the game. They co-developed two versions of the game for the consoles. And that was pretty much, and then there was it was leading up to release. Now, I was still in college at the time, and my schedule was full that week. It was completely full all week. I think it was released towards a time when I had a lot of papers to write, and I had a lot of classes to go to. I had a lot of work to do the rest of that week. But Monday night, I had nothing to do. It was the stuff wasn't being assigned yet. Basically, I didn't really have anything to do that Monday night, and I quickly realized that as the game was coming up for release, my best bet was to try to get into a midnight launch, which I didn't even have pre-ordered, and play the game as much as I could before I had to go to school the next day. And that's exactly what I did. I found out the one store in my area that was doing a midnight release. I crashed it. I didn't have a pre-order, and I paid cash for the game. I just bought the game without a pre-order, and I was able to pick up a copy. So I was really happy about that. There was a guy dressed as a clone trooper at the event. There were a few guys with. It wasn't a huge crowd. It was at least more than a dozen people. There were a few people there. I've certainly seen smaller events. Didn't really chat too much. I was only there for about 15 to 30 minutes. I went there pretty late. Didn't really do any pre-release festivities or anything like that. Got my copy and left. That night, Robot Chicken re-aired their Star Wars special. I think that Robot Chicken, which is a series created by Seth Green and Matthew Steinrich, I believe, that's a stop-motion action figure type thing where they take action figures and they do parodies and stuff like that with the action figures. I think what got them on the map, really, they had done a few series, but when they did their first Star Wars special, it was so good. I really liked that Star Wars special. In fact, I remembered I didn't watch it when it came out, but I remembered that summer when it did come out, being on the Adult Swim website and watching all the clips from it, because they actually had all the clips. I think they had to by law or something. I don't know. Maybe it's something about the property, but they had to put all the clips online for the episode. Might have had something to do with the deal they had with Lucas. I don't know, but they had all the clips of the show available on the Adult Swim website, and I watched them, and I just loved all the different bits. And it was so cool when they re-aired the special that night. I mean, it really felt like, almost like, how do I put this? The time before the episode 1 release, if that made any sense. I could probably imagine that Star Wars fandom, the height of Star Wars fandom was probably between the years of 1995 to 1999. That was the height of Star Wars fandom. The final version of Star Wars Remastered was finally uncensored or uncut or unchanged. Was released to VHS in 1994 or 1995 or so. The Star Wars website was launched in 1995. The special edition started coming out around 1997. It came to, and some of the best games for Star Wars were coming out around that time too. Between that era, it finally, of course, stopped. the height of the fandom stopped when everybody hated Phantom Menace, of course, but that was the height of it. And I can remember that, I don't know, there was just something in the air that, it was like, it almost felt like, to me, the time getting up to that. The time, almost felt like for the first, I had gone opening day to episode 2. I had gone opening day to episode 3. There was no, it was basically like when I went to go see those movies, nobody was really there they were just there to get it over with, to see the movie, and there was no excitement about it, especially for episode 3. There was just no excitement about it. It was a packed theater, but everybody was just silent and just waiting, expecting it to be bad. For Force Unleashed, people were expecting it to be good. And I remember that there was like I said, there was a huge marketing campaign. The books were out by that point. They already had the making of art book for The Force Unleashed out on Barnes & Noble. They had the graphic novel. I think they even had a printed novel, I don't know what you would call it, a printed paperback novel of the book adaptation of the game at Barnes & Noble. Barnes & Noble even had a little special table at the time set up to it. I think I remember it actually even, how do I put this? I actually went on Star Tours around, I think it was 07 or '08. I can't remember. But I think I remembered I was seeing Force Unleashed merchandise after I got off Star Tours. That was one of the last people to get to ride Star Tours, or I should say rewrite it, because I had gone on a few times. I think I had gone on at least once or twice in Florida before they changed it, and at least once in California before they changed it. And so I had gone on Star Tours for the last time, and I remember there was a lot of Force Unleashed merchandise. In fact, I think I remember Force Unleashed Lego sets and stuff, which I thought was kind of cool. So I'm like, yeah, there's something big here about this. It's practically going to be, is this Star Wars thing, is this Force Unleashed thing going to be the next Shadow of the Empire or something like that? Or is it going to be bigger than Episode 3? And the game came out, and I started playing it, and the gameplay was crap. Utter broken crap. The story was great. The art style was great. Heck, I didn't even mind the actors or the. I didn't mind the actors. I didn't mind the voiceover work or the art style. In fact, actually, I remembered I loved the art style so much, especially of Raxus Prime, which is the junkyard planet. I remembered enjoying the art style, even in the game, so much that I picked up the making of book just so I could get some of that concept art. In a paperback, in an art book form, in a tabletop book form. But I just remembered feeling, especially during some of the Jedi fights, but particularly after about the first or second level, when everybody just was armed with rocket launchers. And when you got hit with a rocket launcher, you'd fall to the ground like a rag doll and slide across the ground like you were on ice without the ability, until all of a sudden you got up. I tried every single button, I tried every single combination to accelerate the getting up, or to stop the getting up, or to stop the falling down and sliding across the ground like on ice. And I couldn't. And the early levels were fun. I think, in fact, if I remember correctly, the first level was a level that kind of was like the level they chose to use for the demo, which was the least complicated level and probably one of the most fun levels, because you could just screw around in it and do whatever you wanted. And but by the later levels, heck, some of the boss fights, I remember the Kaz Imperatus's boss fight sucked. It was just like, I'm like, what's the I could never. I don't think I could ever figure out what the timing was, or what was the thing I was supposed to do to beat him quickly, especially on the higher difficulties. He was. I mean, I could never figure out what his pattern was, or how to. I just kept getting thrown to the ground and sliding across the platform and stuff like that into other stuff. Couldn't. And this was on the low difficulties, this was on the medium difficulties, this was on the higher difficulties. There was no different. You'd be sliding across the landscape constantly. I cannot remember being more disappointed. That having been said, it wasn't terrible. There was a lot going for it that I liked. I liked the collectibles. I liked screwing around with... I liked finding special uniforms and special lightsaber crystals and... I remember I loved the cutscenes. I loved all this. I thought the story was great. It had built upon that story where basically you're playing as Darth Vader's secret apprentice. He's having you hunt down Jedi. You have this beautiful Imperial pilot that's assisting you that the main character may or may not have a crush on, but yeah, has a crush on. You had a great droid named Proxy, expanding on the killer robot that was... loved so much in Knights of the Old Republic. But Proxy was able to do stuff that we had never seen before, which was he could do a holographic projection of another person by remote, which was kind of cool. Or he could do that sort of thing, but he had holographic projections on files, so he could be used as like a training as a training droid. Had a bit of a murderous spree, he wanted to kill the guy, make him happy, that sort of thing. That was his programming. Probably Vader did that. Um, it made for some cool gameplay. They were able to get, they were able to get a fight in with Qui-Gon Jinn. They were able to get a fight in with Darth Sidious, with Darth Maul that way. A little nod to the canceled Darth Maul project. Even they even started playing Duel of the Fates when he turned into Darth Maul. Also, I thought that was kind of cool. There were some good boss fights. Don't get me wrong, there were some cool boss fights. I liked the Rancor fights. I liked some of the other big fights. But I think what everybody wanted to know was, especially when the reviews started coming out, what about the Star Destroyer sequence that everybody was highly anticipating? And everyone hated the Star Destroyer sequence when they finally played it. You would have thought something so awesome in theory would actually be completely awesome in practice. And they just made it completely unfun. And in fact, actually in the original version of it, the button prompts for the Star Destroyer were completely wrong. Completely wrong, the button prompts. For the thumbsticks to get it to, it almost felt like you were basically doing air traffic control as opposed to being a Jedi, like you were waving this thing into land pretty much. It didn't feel, but to me what was so annoying was the TIE fighters that you had to constantly be swatting off, and they were almost like flies basically. They were small and they were big and they were. It was the TIE fighters for me that was what made the scene so bad. It wasn't the air traffic controllers. It was in just how inaccurate the targeting was to get the TIE fighters, to swat away the TIE fighters. That was what was so annoying about it. If they had improved the targeting for force powers so that it was easier to get the TIE fighters to blow up the TIE fighters that would be attacking you while you were trying to do this, that sequence alone would have been a lot more fun. That having been said, like I said, there was some great stuff about it. Jimmy Smits came back, he reprised his role as Organa, and he was great. And he was great in it. He was great, and this was finally about, I don't know if I should really give you guys spoilers because it's an older game, but I guess right now I probably just have to put up a spoiler tag, basically. Darth Vader, the Emperor becomes aware of Darth Vader having an apprentice and orders Darth Vader to kill the apprentice. Darth Vader does attempt to try to kill the apprentice, or at least make it look like he's killed the apprentice in front of the Emperor. And what he does instead is that he does end up saving him after. Of course, the apprentice survives, and using the Force for the first time as a Jedi, seeks out where Vader and the Emperor are, and discover that they've taken the early rebel prisoners in to a massive battle station about the size of a small moon. And yes, you know exactly what I'm talking about there. So it's a great, it is a great moment. And we got to see for the first time, a early construction of the first Death Star, basically. And in a cool moment, probably one of my favorite moments of the game, Juno's about to drop him off on the Death Star. He's about to jump off, and she says, "Am I ever going to see you again?" And he's like, "Probably not," because he's thinking this is definitely a suicide mission. And she grabs him and kisses him. It's a sweet moment. It's a sweet moment. It kind of felt like it didn't feel like it was too much, because their relationship had been spent building all over the course of the game. He liked her. That's like the first moment we find out that she liked him back. She had seen how much he had changed towards and become better and everything else, and I guess she liked him back. Guess so. I liked that moment. Then it got to a gameplay segment, which I still have nightmares about, even on the lower difficulty, which was so annoying. And it finally culminated with the battle between the apprentice and Vader. that basically brought back the Star Wars decision, or the Jedi Knight decision. Do you choose the dark side or do you choose the light side? And I was happy they brought that back. I really was. However, in the Jedi Knight solutions, at least even if you chose the dark side, you'd have an applicable, appropriate dark side decision. Like Kyle Katarn became the freaking Emperor if he chose the dark side, basically. For the Force Unleashed, and even with the Force Unleashed 2, both of the dark side endings were a bit of a downer. Even though they were expanded with the DLC in both cases, and I'll go into that in a little bit. If you choose to strike down Vader in anger for retaliation for everything that he's done, the Emperor is ready to accept you as his next apprentice, basically. But you choose not to, and you try to kill the Emperor, which is not possible, and he, of course, defeats you and kills all your friends and leaves you for dead. And you practically become, or the apprentice practically becomes like the more machine than man problem that Vader had. He practically becomes like the next Darth Vader, basically. And the Emperor says he's basically just going to use him as he used Vader. Kind of a downer ending, really. Granted, you were going to do some, you were going to strike down somebody. Maybe you should, it seems like at this point, LucasArts always seemed like a fault, being seduced by the dark side will always end with your bad things happening to you. Nothing good will happen to you. Maybe it was what happened to Anakin, basically, is what established that. Like, nothing good will come from you if you choose come to you if you choose the dark side. I don't know how I feel about this. I always prefer the light side over the dark side. Is the dark side stronger? No. Quicker, easier, more seductive. But at the very least, it always seemed like you could do something with the dark side. And it was basically, in this case, it was like freaking horrible stuff will happen to you if you choose the dark side. And quickly. Wouldn't take a while. If you choose not to strike down Vader, you have to do a battle with the Emperor, which is a pretty tough boss fight, but at least a playable boss fight. The Emperor had tells and stuff like that, and ways that you could dodge attacks and stuff. So I gotta give him props for that one. It took some time to get the tells down, but you could do that. You could fight him. And it wasn't an unfun boss fight. Like I said, there was still the broken gameplay to deal with, but at the very least, like I said, you'd have tells and stuff like that. So he was definitely beatable, as was the Vader fight. At least the second half of the Vader fight. If you choose the light side, the the rebel prisoners survive. They make it off the planet, go back to Kashyyyk. The apprentice is killed. However, as we all know, there is no death, there is the Force. And both the Emperor and Vader agree that in death he is more powerful than ever. Which is the same line that Obi-Wan threatened Darth Vader with. If you strike me down, I shall become more powerful than you could possibly imagine. In death, you're even stronger than you are in the life with the Force. At least if you're that powerful in the Force. And even though Obi-Wan didn't teach him that trick about how to survive even after death, after you become one with the Force, it's possible he was strong enough to figure it out on his own. I mean, Qui-Gon was able to figure it out on his own, that sort of thing. I mean, Vader was able to figure it out on his own. Although I don't know about the expanded... Maybe he might have figured it out in the expanded universe. I don't know. But we never saw Vader actually know what the trick was, at least in the 6 movies. So maybe it was just simple that he was powerful enough in death to come back, that sort of thing. At the very end, there's a great battle. There's a great moment at the very end where Juno and the rest of the rebels are together after having been saved by the apprentice. Princess Leia is there with her father. Juno is there. Ram Kota is there. who had trained the apprentice in the ways of the Jedi. And they decide and Princess decides that they need a flag to rally behind. And on the table, underneath, right on the table, in the apprentice's father's abandoned hut on Kashyyyk, is this symbol of the Rebel Alliance, the symbol that his father had on his house. And that's their flag, that's their coat of arms, their banner, and that's what they became known as. And it's a great moment at the very end where Koda speaks to Juno, and he says, I saw something redeemable about him. Even I saw, you had a big place in his heart. And it ends, he's dead, the Rebel Alliance is formed, he sacrificed himself, but he's a hero. A great ending. Yeah, he's dead, but it was a good ending. I liked it. I was kind of hoping that they'd make a sequel. Overall, I thought the game's story, even though the gameplay was really bad, it had some redeemable parts about it. There were some redeemable gameplay segments. I figured this could be polished. This could be fixed. If they did a sequel or if they patched it, it could be fixed. There were a few patches released for the game as well as extra content. They added extra playable skins for the Secret Apprentice, 2 skin packs. They also added, almost immediately, they added an expandable DLC level, which, as far as I can tell, really didn't fit into the game's story. There was really no place to put it. I really couldn't think of a place to actually put it in the game's story. It just didn't fit. Where the apprentice is charged by Vader to investigate the destroyed Jedi Temple. I think that scene actually was included in the Wii version, or a scene like it was included in the Wii version. But the whole game itself, start to finish, there was just nowhere to put that level. At least as far as I could tell, there was nowhere to put that level. Maybe he could have gone there before, at the events of. Before the whole events of the game's story start, and maybe you can consider the events of the beginning a flashback, basically. So, but he's pretty powerful, and it's I don't know. It's just it felt like there's nowhere to put that scene, basically. Maybe, like I said, the only place I could think of would be that it would have to have taken place before he's charged to seek out General Kota, basically. At some point there. Other than that, I can't really think of anywhere else to put it. It doesn't seem to fit in the game's story. So there's that. It was a fun scene. The funny part was, of course, that I downloaded it almost immediately. In fact, I downloaded it before they actually added the achievements, so I actually ended up having to play it a second time or a third time in order to unlock all the achievements in it, because the first time I played through it, the achievements hadn't yet been added to it yet, so I had to play it all over again to get the achievements in the game. It still had some gameplay problems, but it wasn't, I don't know. It seemed like it was still a fun scene. It was still a fun little level. And I was happy that they finally brought in achievements for it, so there was a reason to replay it and stuff like that. After that, LucasArts announced that they were going to be re-releasing the game as the Sith Edition. And they would be including the game plus all the DLC for it up to that point. Do a PC port. And include new levels that hadn't been seen before, that would have included what would have happened after the events of the Dark Side ending. So, Starkiller, the Secret Apprentice, had survived the end of the Dark Side ending. This would have been what would have happened in the Star Wars universe had Starkiller been the Emperor's apprentice as opposed to Darth Vader by that point. And what would have been different. There were 2 levels. One was on Tatooine. The other was on Hoth. They were piecemealed out. Only one of them actually got achievements. I think that it was just... I don't know why. The Hoth levels never had achievements. I have no idea why not. They never added achievements to the Hoth levels. There were holocrons. There were other reasons to get them in the Hoth level. I don't know why they decided not to include achievements for it. But he would have killed Kenobi. He was familiar with Kenobi because, of course, he had used Kenobi. Proxy had Kenobi's training droid. And at the end of it, he would have gotten Luke to fall to the dark side after facing him on Hoth. None of that is canonical. I know that the Star Wars games occasionally can do non-canonical stuff. So none of it was canonical. But they were fun. They were fun enough levels. They were pretty harmless, I thought. I wish I had picked up a Sith edition of the game. Now the Sith editions of the game, with the exception of the PC version, because that's the only version you can find for the PC version. But if you can get your hands on a copy of the Sith edition of the game, get one, because all of the extra content was included on the disc, and some of it can be installed. So copies of the Sith edition of that game are quite valuable to collectors right now. You can play the DLC levels, but you need to play it on the second disc. I think what happened was the second disc included all the character content as installable stuff, but the DLC levels had to be played on the second disc. Those weren't installable. And now you can't find copies of it at all. The versions of the game that are out now that have been re-released are all just a new pressing of the original disc, basically. You have to buy all the DLC separately again. So the Sith edition did not last very long, unfortunately. But if you play on the PC version of the game is the Sith edition, so you'll be able to play all that. It was cool. I never picked it up because I already had the game. I already had picked up the game day one. I'm kind of kicking myself for that. They were, like I said, they were fun DLC levels. I did download one of the character skin packs. I didn't download the other one. I thought they charged way too much for those character skin packs. They were 400 Microsoft points a piece, which is a lot of money for a couple of skins. I think the Jedi content, the Jedi Temple content, was about 800 Microsoft points, which I thought was fair for a pretty long full level. And the same thing with the other individual levels. I thought that they were fair at that price, but I thought the character skins were way too highly priced. It was not. They were not. It was 400 a piece for two different packs. Forget it. I only ended up buying one and never really using it that much. So, what can we take away from this first game? Well, the storyline was there. The art style was there. The characters and the actors were all there. But the gameplay really needed a lot more polishing. The engine was great, but it just wasn't ready. Like I said, you'll be sliding on turf like a rag doll while you were, like you were on ice or something. That should not be happening at all. I understand maybe they wanted to make the game more difficult or something like that than being all-powerful, but that was not the way you do it. You make him take more damage or something like that, but you keep him on his feet. And then like the whole sliding on ground, forget it. That was just so, I don't know, it just felt to me like that was a broken engine or a physics engine or something like that. That should not have been like that. But I honestly had high hopes that if they decided to make another one, these kind of things could be fixed. Maybe they couldn't have patched in fixes for The Force Unleashed, but maybe if they made a second game, they could have fixed those things. They could have made the gameplay a lot tighter. That sort of thing could happen. And the last thing I kind of want to say about The Force Unleashed was it did still feel like, well, at least for the, it made a cool point for the expanded universe. I was grateful to have all the books available and stuff like that. I'm sure that there were a lot of other Star Wars fans that were really happy about having this new content in the Star Wars universe. In fact, as far as I remember, they even added an RPG for those pen and paper RPG players out there. There was even an expanded Force Unleashed rules and stuff like that for the Star Wars universe. So it definitely helped in that respect. It definitely added to the Star Wars lore, which is something that we didn't think was going to be happening anymore. We didn't know about any more Star Wars movies coming out. I think that a lot of people didn't even want more Star Wars movies to be coming out if George Lucas was making them. So yeah, I think I was more appreciated by what they tried to do than what they actually had delivered on. Not too long after the release of The Force Unleashed, LucasArts announced we're doing a sequel. Now, immediately people are going to be thinking two things. Well, if they are going to do a sequel, how are they going to do a sequel? Because you can't really do a sequel if your main character is dead. And if they were to use the dark side ending, it can't possibly be canonical because we already played what would have happened if the dark side ending had continued, and it would have completely broken the Star Wars canon, which wouldn't have been allowed. So if there was an ending, he would have had to have been dead. But he's back. And Vader's back, and Juno's back. It was announced on, I think it was the VGAs. They announced at the Spike VGA Awards, they showed the first teaser. It's back. He's back. This is the Force Unleashed 2. And it was punctuated by 2 lightsabers. The 2 meaning coming from that he's now going to be using 2 lightsabers as opposed to 1. Which I thought was pretty awesome because I'm a fan of 2 lightsaber battles. I always played, the Jedi I played in Jedi Academy was a dual lightsaber guy. I liked dual lightsaber fighters. I thought it was more difficult, but I always thought of dual lightsaber fighters as a lot more plausible than a single dual-bladed lightsaber guy like Darth Maul was. That's just me. I thought you could do a lot more with 2 lightsabers than you could with a single with a double-bladed lightsaber. Like you could throw 2 lightsabers, or you could throw one of your lightsabers and still have the other one to fight with, or you could choose to deactivate one of those lightsabers and still fight. That sort of thing. I liked the concept of a 2 lightsaber fighter, and but I was skeptical. I think, like a lot of people, I was really skeptical. The Force Unleashed 2 did not have a very long development time. From what I looked up on Wikipedia, I think it was only about 9 months of development. It pretty much started shortly after Force Unleashed was released, and it wasn't in development for very long. I really don't have too much to say about the game's development because it happened so fast. Needless to say, I was excited for it because the early demos of it all made it look like they fixed the gameplay. And that was what was so exciting for me, was that at least the gameplay is working now. So if the gameplay works, then this game could be perfect. I mean, everything. I really liked the story of the first Force Unleashed game. I was really excited to see what would be happening with how to continue that story. Who would be back? How did he come back? That sort of thing. And the game got released. It was another multi-platform release. It came out on the PC, Xbox 360, PS3. I think there was a DS port, Wii. I picked up the Xbox 360 version, and I started to play it. And I stopped playing it because the game was very short. I guess it's because it only took 9 months to develop it, but that game did not last very long. Did not take me very long to play. I think the last time I played a game that short, where I was able to beat it in like one sitting or two very quickly, was probably Quake 4. Quake 4's campaign I was able to beat in one night. Force Unleashed 2, I don't remember how long it took me to play, but I might have actually done it in maybe a few short sittings. But I can specifically remember it not taking that long. And I can remember feeling like when I was getting towards the ending of the game, I'm like, this feels like an ending. But it can't be an ending because I have not been playing this game for that long. It felt short. I liked the storyline, how the storyline was building up to that point. I kind of felt like, whereas Force Unleashed 2 was the original Force Unleashed was kind of trying to establish a whole canon in the Star Wars universe. Force Unleashed 2 was trying to tell a completely different story. It wasn't trying to tell a big epic story in the Star Wars universe. It was trying to tell a personal story. The apprentice is back, and all he's interested in is getting Juno back. That's all he cares about. He doesn't care about the Rebel Alliance. He doesn't care about Vader. He will stop anything that comes between him and Juno. That's it. All he wants is Juno. That's a singular focus. Nothing else is important. Nothing else matters. Juno is what matters to him. He wants Juno back, that's it. Honorable. And understandable, relatable. I'm a man, I want my woman back, that sort of thing. I think there are probably cave drawings about that sort of stuff. It's one of the most basic stories that you could possibly tell, ever. I want my lady. But the problem was, at least as far as I could tell, it's not a story that can sustain for very long. General Coda came back. His interest was in bringing the Rebel Alliance, getting a victory for the Rebel Alliance. We didn't know the status of Juno, if she was alive, where she was, that sort of thing. That was, the big plot line. Yoda had a cameo. In fact, some of the early footage of what was in that, some of the early footage, one was a cutscene actually of the apprentice encountering Yoda. And this is a Yoda that was living on Dagobah before he met Luke, basically. So Yoda was kind of pretending to be something that he wasn't, but you could tell, okay, he's, he was slipping in between the fake Yoda that he appeared to as Luke in the beginning, and then he says, "And there's what you seek." He kind of did relent, and for a moment, he didn't stand between anybody, and he didn't stand between the apprentice. He's like, "I'm just a watcher. That's it. I'm just here to observe." He didn't really contribute much to the plot, to be perfectly honest. I think he was just there because the tree in Dagobah was so necessary that the apprentice had to seek out this tree. It was a cool Deus Ex Machina. I got to give it that. And I think that a lot of people would have argued, well, isn't Yoda going to be there? And I think it would have worked. I think that they could have done it better, though. And the reason why they could have done it better was the level was very short. And there were only 4 environments in the game. In Force Unleashed, there were a few separate environments, and they did recycle environments. But Force Unleashed 2 didn't really even recycle. At least it didn't feel like it was recycling the environments. It did. Maybe that was because everybody complained about the recycling of the environments for the first game. They did recycle Camino, and that was how they established that the apprentice was able to come back. Vader cloned him. And there was this whole argument building up in the very beginning of the game. You can't clone Jedi. And that was like something that Coda was saying. It's like, no, it's you. It's got to be you. You're not a clone. Vader told you you're a clone. You can't possibly be a clone. You can't clone a Jedi at all. And even if you tried, the clone wouldn't have a connection to the Force. You have a connection to the Force. I can feel it. It's exactly as Starkiller's was. That was never resolved. At least not to, that whole plot thread. Is he or isn't he? It never felt like that was resolved. In some of the material that I looked up, it is clear that he is indeed a clone. Or one of many clones. But, because he's referred to on the Star Wars Wikipedia as being the clone of Starkiller, not Starkiller. And that seemed to me like if he is a clone, it doesn't make for as interesting a story. To me, it's almost like telling the Blade Runner story. Is he a replicant or isn't he a replicant? Well, you could say, well, Decker's a replicant. If he is a replicant, it makes for a very shitty story. And I'll tell you why. It always felt to me like when I was watching Blade Runner, even when I was watching the director's cuts of Blade Runner, that it worked best under a simple theme of you had a human being played by Harrison Ford who has lost his humanity, fighting against robots. They were called replicants, but they were robots that were trying to find a humanity that they couldn't get. They were trying to achieve the human, and they were the bad guys. So the good guy was the human who had lost his humanity and all the work that he had to do, and was getting worse in that, trying to find his humanity back. But and the replicants that he was fighting, trying to get the humanity that they never could have, that they were programmed to try to find. That to me made for an interesting story. That for me made for an interesting theme. If you make Deckard a replicant, the whole story falls apart for a few reasons. One, his boss never would have liked him because his boss was racist and always referred to robots by derogatory terms. Never would have hired Deckard in the first place to be a Blade Runner. Secondly, you could have programmed memories for him, sure, but you never could have programmed experience. And it was quite obvious to me that he had a lot of experience doing this. And with their lifespan the way it was, and the lifespan limitations, and you could say, well, maybe he doesn't have a lifespan limitation. No, he would have had a lifespan limitation. The rest of them all did. There was no reason to suspect, except in the non-director's cut, where they clearly established that only Sean Young's model had lifespan. It had no lifespan, but that was only in the in the theatrical cut, and that was removed. But even you could argue there, it's like it was only her, and because she was unique in that. So you could have argued many times over, well, there is no without Sean Young to have that ability. I'm kind of going into Blade Runner here, but basically, if basically my whole point is that Starkiller being a clone, the second story kind of just falls apart. And it's never established, is he or isn't he? The the general consensus is he is. But I think that it would have been nice if that was resolved in some way. Even if it was he's not. It would have been nicer if it was a resolved thing. Especially at the very end of the light side ending, where he's screaming at Vader, "You told me I was a clone. I let you live," and I'm kind of getting a bit ahead of myself, but it made for a cool moment in an otherwise bad ending. Anyways, neither anyone really liked any ending to the game. As I said, I really don't want to brush too much into the game story because, let's face it, there really isn't one, so I'll just kind of go about the quick gist. This takes place sometime after the events of the first game. Vader is quote-unquote trying to clone Starkillers because Starkiller is dead, to try to have a perfect servant that he can use to fight the Rebel Alliance he had unwittingly been a part in creating. The clones have been failing. Either they're not force sensitive, they're dying prematurely, or they're not being obedient enough. And finally he comes across one that he thinks can be powerful enough to destroy the Rebel Alliance, and he charges him to destroy Ram Kota, figuring that killing Ram Kota would probably, okay, I'll have a clone I'll have a clone that will at least be obedient to me. And the clone breaks out, steals Vader's TIE fighter, saves Ram Kota, and starts looking for Juno. After checking out Dagobah, he finds where he can find Juno. He sees a glimpse of the future and thinks where he can find Juno. Finds Juno, goes back to Kamino to rescue Juno from, I think it was Boba Fett and Vader. And destroy the rebels. End up destroying the cloning systems, and in the end, he has to make a choice to kill Vader or not. If you choose to kill Vader, Vader does not actually die. That's a dark side ending, and the secret apprentice is killed by a quote-unquote perfect clone that is completely obedient to Vader. He just all of a sudden appears out of nowhere, kills Starkiller. Juno is dead. And I think even Kota is dead. And Vader and the secret apprentices kind of go off to, do their own thing. That I don't think would be a canonical ending because of the DLC, and I'll get into that in just a second. If you choose to spare Vader, Vader is actually taken prisoner. Vader's taken prisoner, Juno survives. It's a bit too perfect an ending, and he's later trucked off into to Dantooine, which is the early Rebel base or something like that. And how do we put this? And he said, the Secret Apprentice gives a long thing. It's like, I let you live. It was my choice to let you live. You told me I was a clone. You tortured me. You did all this horrible stuff. You wanted me to kill my people I cared about. But I let you live. Vader says nothing except until the apprentice is about to leave, and he says, as long as Juno's alive, you serve me. And he just says, that's always something I know I can hold over you. Which is something horrible that Vader would absolutely say. You could just tell that's an episode 4 Vader. That's that is pure evil. That is something that a pure evil Vader would say. That is not a redeemable individual who would say that sort of thing. And I liked it. I really did like that moment. And Vader's taken prisoner, hauled off, and Boba Fett and the Slave One are basically kind of start following them in secret, and that's the end of the game. And you're thinking, this can't be the end. Vader can't be taken prisoner. So as far as they're concerned, okay, the one ending on the light side is too perfect. It's too perfect an ending. Vader could never have been taken prisoner by the Rebel Alliance. He couldn't have. He's far too powerful for that. And on the second thing, you say, well, Starkiller's dead. That's a shit ending. And he doesn't die a hero's death. He dies a cheap death by a camper who is just sitting there in secret and stabs him in the back. That's not a hero's death. That's not an honorable death. That's a crap death. By a loser. It's like if somebody stabs you in the back when you're not looking, whoever killed you is a jerk, is a coward. You know, you're putting this guy off as some big baddie or something like that. He's a coward. He stabbed Starkiller right in the back. That's a coward. That's a person who can't fight. That's a person who knows he can't win in a battle because he'll stab you in the back. Don't get me started on that one. It didn't seem like that'd be the kind of person that Vader would... Maybe that'd be the kind of person Vader would train. But it didn't seem like it didn't seem like a respectable or anything thing to do. And not something that would be a character that would be in any way respectable. So, we don't know what would have happened. There were never any DLC levels released for the good side ending, but there was one DLC level released for the dark side ending. And I actually recently played it. I didn't even know about it. And I only played it recently because I was in the process of working on some game footage or trying to get some game footage before I decided to do this podcast. I was thinking about doing something else with the game footage, and I may end up doing that. Maybe doing a So What Happened or something with it. So I was in the process of recording the game footage, and I found out that they had released this DLC level for very cheap, only 80 Microsoft points, which I didn't believe was even possible that they would release DLC for that cheap. But they did. Possibly it was as a forgive us for releasing such a short retail game for a full price of $60, because that's what they did. There was a collector's edition for Force Unleashed 2. Most of it was DLC. You got some special DLC lightsabers. And I think there was some DLC. There was some DLC challenge maps. I never really played the challenge maps. I didn't care for them that much. It was kind of annoying to get high scores in them. And so they released this DLC challenge or DLC expansion called the Endor expansion. And what it was basically a... how do I put this? It was a level that would have taken place during the Battle of Endor had the Dark Side ending happened for Force Unleashed 2. However, there are a few problems with that ending. One was Vader wouldn't have been alive. That would have taken into account that Force Unleashed 2 had happened and you would have chosen the Dark Side ending. However, it also would have taken into account that Force Unleashed 1 would have happened and they had chosen the Dark Side ending. There was a reference actually to that. Force Unleashed 1 and Force Unleashed 2 aren't compatible with the Force Unleashed 1 was dark-sided. So my guess is that if the DLC was released, it would have probably taken Force Unleashed 1 and the Force Unleashed, it might have been just an expansion of like Force Unleashed 1, Sith Edition levels, and then Dark Side, and then no Force Unleashed 2, and then the Endor level. But even then, it kind of falls apart. Because you wouldn't have had the secret of, because, all right, let me explain this. The whole plotline of the Endor battle was that the perfect clone, the one that stabbed you in the back at the dark side ending of Force Unleashed 2, is sent to Endor by Vader and the Emperor to kill all the rebels. And he ends up succeeding. He ends up succeeding, killing all of the rebels that were trying to attack the shield generator protecting the second Death Star. With the second Death Star protected, the Rebel Alliance has no help in destroying the second Death Star, and that's the end of that's the end. In the very, very, very ending, Emperor and Vader both decide that they are going to kill the clone, and they start sending like a fleet of ships to blast them from low orbit. And he just kind of smiles like, okay, I'm going to take them out. And you think that maybe even more is going to happen from there, but that's it. That's the end. That's the last we ever see of the Force Unleashed. Don't know really how to place it exactly. The reference that it does make to the Sith Edition is that Leia thinks that her brother was killed on Hoth, or had gone missing after the Battle of Hoth, which is a reference to the ending of the Sith Edition, where the turned apprentice, or the dark apprentice, whatever you want to call him, after he had turned to the dark side, Starkiller, after having turned to the dark side and killing Vader and being used by the Emperor, fights Luke and actually is able to turn him to the dark side and turns him into his apprentice, and they're going to use him against Vader. The final battle between the perfect clone apprentice is actually between him and Princess Leia. But Princess Leia actually Jedi Force sensitive, which does work. That would have worked. I like that. In fact, I thought Leia actually looks pretty good as a Jedi. So I liked that. And in the end, Leia's defeated, and that's the end of it. I liked that. That I actually liked. I did like the possibility of a continuity where Leia became a Jedi, because she was certainly Force sensitive. And we never ever saw her, not in the movies, and I don't even know about it in the expanded universe, where she became a Jedi. Or she had used her Force-sensitive powers to help her as a diplomat in the expanded universe, I think. But I don't think we ever saw her as a Jedi. The missing of Luke was what could have pushed her towards that. So let's talk about what the future of this IP is. I think it's dead. And that's really unfortunate. I really think there should be a Force Unleashed 3 in some form, whether it be a CGI animated movie, a graphic novel, or a printed book or something like that. I really think there should be a Force Unleashed 3 because Force Unleashed 2's cliffhanger endings, it couldn't have, the DLC established that the bad side ending was not canonical because it would have broken the rest of the Star Wars universe. And usually an ending that would break the rest of the Star Wars universe is not the canonical ending. Usually the one that can get away with being the not breaking Star Wars universe is usually the canon ending. And so I'd be interested to see just how Fett is able to rescue Vader, or how Vader is able to get out of his bind, basically, and what does this mean for Starkiller's clone and Juno and everything, because we never really see any other messages of them. So it would be, maybe it's just too much of a downer to put as a video game what that ending would be. But maybe it can be done as something else. Maybe it could be done as like a graphic novel, perhaps. LucasArts doesn't exist anymore. George Lucas sold his stake. He sold his company to Disney. Disney now owns Star Wars. And that probably includes the Force Unleashed IP as well. And all the publishing rights for video games in that respect have all gone to EA, where EA is working on the new Battlefront game, or a new type of Battlefront game, which is fine. They can work on that. But I seriously doubt that they're going to be working on Force Unleashed 3 after what people thought of Force Unleashed 2. The critics were not kind to Force Unleashed 2. However, if I actually may take something positive of Force Unleashed 2, I thought the gameplay was fixed. I thought that everything about the gameplay was perfect. The targeting system was fixed. The graphics were much better. The frame rate felt much better. The effects felt much better. The only problem with Force Unleashed 2 that I had was it was too short and the story was bad. And especially the endings I didn't like. Maybe if I played it a second time, I might have more appreciation for it, but it was just short. But everything else, it's kind of interesting how I feel one way about Force Unleashed 1, and I feel the exact opposite way about Force Unleashed 2. And it's kind of funny, they're both 50-50 by that respect. The gameplay was broken, but the story was good for Force Unleashed 1. The gameplay was fixed for Force Unleashed 2. I really liked the gameplay for Force Unleashed 2. But I didn't like the story that much, and it was very short. So, I don't know. I really still would buy a Force Unleashed 3. I would. And I'm kind of hoping that maybe maybe EA would be interested in making a Force Unleashed 3 or something like it, perhaps, that could finish that story in some way or wrap up that story. Maybe you wouldn't play as Star Killer, maybe you'd play as someone else, but it would be a type of Force Unleashed game where you play as another super powerful Jedi or something. I would really want. I want to see that. I would like to see a new Force Unleashed type game. Make it happen, Luke. Make it happen, EA. So that's my take on the Force Unleashed. That's really 2 games, a lot of promise, not a lot of payoff, but still worthy of a podcast, I think. I know a lot of this conversation has been, well, what might have been and that sort of thing, but I still, again, think it was a worthy addition to the Star Wars franchise and something that I hope that they can, I think that this can be expanded upon further, and I think that they can fix this. I really do. I think that this is something that can be improved. This is something that, the concept is solid. It really is. So maybe, take for that. Maybe that would mean you have to do a remake of the first one. Maybe that was what they'll decide to do. I don't know. But the next generation consoles, the Xbox One, the PS4, are really going to be powerful. And next generation PCs are pretty powerful too. Maybe it'd be very interesting to see just what is possible graphically and physically for the future of the Star Wars universe and for the future of the Force Unleashed. So that's my take on it, guys. Until next time, this is Maniac with GameAccess.net. May the Force be with you. Over and out.